Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Creation Matters podcast, where we focus on sharing the reliability of the Bible, real science, and the gospel. I'm your host, Preston Knapp, and joining me in studio today is our very special guest, Dr. Fred Groves. Dr. Groves, thanks for joining us again.
I'm honored to be here.
Dr. Groves, you have a doctorate in science education and your bachelor's degree and master's degrees in zoology. And then you have a second master's degree in secondary administration and supervision. You've been a teacher for 40 plus years, a professor for 26 of those years. And so, you've been, I think you said once you've been a professional student. Basically, you're
I never learned how to get out of school.
Well, I'm glad I got over that myself, so I tried to get out as quick as I could. So today we're going to be looking at environmental issues. We previously have talked about climate change and all of that, and for those of you who haven't heard that episode, we encourage you to do so. But today we're going to be looking at kind of the environment and what that kind of the mess that we've made with it. So when we talk about environmental issues today, what are some of the main things that come to your mind, Dr. Groves?
Well, generally speaking, environmental issues are things that are threatening our way of life or threatening life itself. It may not be directly threatening us, but it's threatening, say, animals. It's threatening the biome, the living world. It can be ecosystems as a major issue, that we are damaging them, breaking ecosystems, causing a lot of, it's like a cascading effect of knocking down dominoes, that when you damage one part of an ecosystem, the whole thing begins to unravel in some cases. If you happen to hit the organism that is the focal point or what actually holds the ecosystem together. And so things like that. And so that's where the threats are that are of major concern that we see.
Yeah, and what are some of those environmental issues, kind of some of the top ones that we're facing today?
Well, we have issues of like air pollution, which is, of course, getting noxious gases from industrial work and other types of things, how to deal with that. There's water pollution, drinking water, as we want to make sure it is pure and clean. We're living in a time that is very recent in the history of the world. For most of history, people had to take water as they found it. Now we're able to purify it and not do that, but do it in a mass production way so that literally billions of people can have clean water. That's a new thing in history. There's soil pollution. You can have contaminants of all sorts that go in. Some of it we put there. Some of it comes through the air by air pollution and settles in soil, but that is a thing that can come back to cause troubles for ecosystems and for people, civilizations and such. Another type of thing that we are concerned about, which gets into the climate science thing, is the issue of rising temperatures. Are they rising? Very, very modestly. Rising ocean water levels, it's moving very, very slowly, not near what's been advertised. The actual hard data shows something very, very different. It's going at about 1/10 the rate. And increasing storms, droughts, and so forth, which again actually are not increasing so much. What's problem is that we are building in places where we shouldn't. Places that we know regularly have floods or regularly have mega droughts or regularly have tornadoes, hurricanes, typhoons, so forth. It'd be smarter not to build where they are found frequently. It's just common sense.
Yeah, for sure. If you know there's going to be a problem someplace, don't put something fragile there. And when we're listing some of those environmental issues that we're facing today, land pollution is kind of one that I've always had an interest in since I dabble a little bit in agriculture and raising animals and stuff, just kind of looking at what we have done to our soils. It can be quite frightening, actually, when you look at historical records and things and realize just how fertile and healthy our soils were just even 500 years ago, and here in North America anyways, and how much that has changed even within just the last 100 years with the Dust Bowl and all of that. It is quite frightening to see the dramatic shift that's taken place.
Mm-hmm.
So when did we start having environmental issues? This might be a little bit of an elementary question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Well, we've always had environmental issues. We just didn't always recognize them as such. Really, with the birth of ecology as a science in the very late 1800s, also during the 1800s, you had various people exploring in the West and noticing that even then that we were taking steps as we moved across this continent that was damaging to wildlife. It's some of these cases are notorious. The loss of the buffalo, we almost drove them to extinction. The passenger pigeon was driven to extinction. It was a major food source for Native Americans and early pilgrims, pioneers and all, but they always thought there would always be more and more, so they kept always collecting, and till there weren't any. North America had its own native parakeet, Carolina parakeet, but it's extinct because of collection of feathers and habitat loss. John Muir and others who moved to get the national park systems going and federal lands and so forth. This is where we became more aware that we must take care of our environment so it takes care of us. The irony here is that the Bible has it in Genesis that we were told, and Adam was told, to be a proper steward of the land and of the earth from the very beginning.
Right.
But we have simply, over the history of mankind, we've done a lousy job.
Yeah, and you hear Christians talk about the dominion mandate sometimes, and that's kind of the description there in Genesis 1, I think, where God tells Adam, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over all that he's created. And some have interpreted that to be kind of this more or less scorch the earth, take advantage of whatever you want because we have dominion. But is that a proper interpretation of that text?
No, it is not. No, that is abuse of it. Yes, the whole idea that God was trying to guide mankind is that we are to be shepherds of the environment, to take care of it, to keep things going properly, to avoid damaging the environment as much as we can. Now, as we spread, we build towns, well, that displaces organisms.
Sure.
That is inevitable as we ourselves, just looking at it biologically as a species, we're doing that, but we can do it responsibly, or we can do it in the sense of exploiting it. Man, in the age of exploration, caused untold damage by finding organisms, animals, sometimes plants, and just deciding, well, look at this is great, we can have all we want, until suddenly they were gone. They went extinct, and it was our fault. Now we understand these things, and we should be learning from it and then act responsibly the word stewardship, I think, is my favorite word here. That whole idea of dominion, when I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but those who are say that really the word there carries the idea of stewardship, not this idea. We hear dominion and we think dominate. They're not the same thing.
Okay. And so what definition would you give for stewardship then?
Well, responsible care for the world around us, to honor the one who created it in the first place, God. And look to him. It's an amazing thing to discover that if you ask God a question sincerely and look to his word, it's either there or he'll guide you to it.
Sure.
He's there. He really is there, and he really does answer questions. Now, the problem is for me, sometimes he answers it in a way I don't want to hear it. I'll ask for something, and he'll say no. But I have to take that as he knows better than I do.
Right. I like that definition that you gave. It kind of is along the same lines of what I'll often say on tour there at the Creation Museum, is I'll tell people that, God intended for us to put the same care and creativity into managing what he gave us as he put into creating it, which is a pretty tall responsibility when you stop and think about it. So we've been having environmental issues for quite a while, sounds like. When did people, and you kind of answered this, but when did people really start getting panicked about them, and what was kind of the logic behind why we needed to suddenly start conserving landscapes and wildlife and things like that?
Well, it was with loss of things like the buffalo or the near loss. Then you move into another big shock to the nation was the 30s Dust Bowl. It was a drought period that we in the Midwest have been going through very recently, very similar. And yet we don't have a Dust Bowl this time because we're farming properly. They were trying to use European methods of farming, which works great in Europe. But the prairies and the plains of America are not Europe.
Right.
You can't treat them the way you do Europe, which has good, reliable precipitation, plenty of water. The soils are rich. The prairies are rich in soil in most places, especially in the Midwest. They have historically had fantastic soils that go down 30, 40, 50 feet deep. And so, but we just went out and we plowed it. We broke up the soil in a type of environment where the soil needs not to be broken up. As a result of all that and the damage it did to food for America was they instituted some laws. They instituted different principles of farming. One of those was the invention of those seed planters that just punch holes in the ground and put the seed in, and so you're not breaking the soil. And that way you don't get the dust blowing away. And the soil disappearing. We learned the hard way about that. We've discovered that with certain things, plastics are both a blessing and a curse. They don't go away easy. We need to find ways to dispose of it once we're not using it. It doesn't just degrade normally like normal organics. This is a synthetic organic, man-made, and so it takes different methods to decompose the stuff and get it back to raw materials and such. But the idea of then wholesale get rid of all plastics would mean most hospitals across the United States would shut down because you think of how much plastics are involved in medicine, in engineering, in the vehicles you drive, your home. We'd be going back to primitive conditions if we had to do that. And you can't run a modern world on primitive conditions like that. So we have to work it other ways. But we recognized we are not disposing of plastics like we should. And the problem is really the fault of the Americas and Europe. We have all this stuff. And so what do? So much of it, we gather it up. Yes, people have recycling bins. It goes there. It gets sorted unless it just goes to the landfill, which has been discovered at times. They pretend to use it and they don't. But where it is, it then eventually, in many cases, gets piled into giant ships, container-style ships, big cargo ships. And it's transported to the third world, to Africa, to Southeast Asia, where it is then given there for them to dispose of it. And there's even at times stepped in to help build the factories and sites that can burn this safely so that toxic gases don't go out and all that. But they're overwhelmed with it, so it ends up in the water, in the oceans. And that's where you see the pictures and the commercials on TV of solid waste, plastic waste like that. It came from us and Europe, the developed nations. That includes China and Japan and others as well. India now, as it's rising out of third world status. So again, we're not being good stewards. If we create something that's a hassle, we need to also create ways to control it. And we've done really well on the create side. We have not done well on the control side.
Yeah, for sure. You brought up the no-till drill that farmers have been using in their fields to get away from having to disc their fields every year. And another thing that I know that they've been using have been cover crops. And, don't just plant one crop that only grows for 4 or 5 months out of the year and then leave the ground exposed the rest of the time. You plant a cover crop in the meantime, which for someone who also raises livestock, that can be very helpful because it can create grazing opportunities. But anyway, that's a discussion for a different podcast. But yeah, you're right. We create problems and we don't always think of good solutions to those. Sometimes when these environmental issues are discussed, the idea that can be communicated is that if we don't change something, we could destroy the earth. In your opinion, is that a real concern that we have or not?
We have the capability to severely damage the earth. And I think the reason it hasn't occurred is God's restraining hand. We have, for example, enough nuclear weapons scattered among the nations that have them that if we went into a war and everybody threw their missiles at everybody else, the destruction there and the poisoning of the atmosphere and scattering of radiation, radioactive particles all over everywhere, it wouldn't wipe out life, but it would be horrific damage that would take decades, if not hundreds of years to recover from. And with some of the radiation, it would take millennia. And we created those things. I mean, nuclear power is great in a nuclear power plant that has clean energy and produces doesn't raise CO2 at all, if that's your concern. And it's cheaper long run. And but we also created nuclear bombs. And that, fortunately, mankind was smart enough to come up with a thing called MAD, mutually assured destruction, as a means that if we all do that, we all die anyway, so let's just agree not to do that. But we still have the weapons.
Sure. So we see in Genesis that the Bible tells us that we are the stewards of this earth. What should our responsibility towards the earth look like? What would be responsible ways of managing the earth?
Well, kind of what we've covered a little bit already. Just look at what and identify that which works, which is safe, which helps. When we come across something where it looks like a problem could occur, take matters to correct it or preventive matters ahead of time. Just pay attention to what we're doing. Too often, countries will just carry on with no concern for trying to preserve something or other. And that's a shame. It's done because man is greedy. We want to make money, and the exploitation side gives quick rewards. The stewardship side can also give major rewards, but it takes longer, and if you're impatient and want to get rich now, you don't want to do that. And so that goes back to the sin nature of man, that we are a solution if we do what God said, but we're also the problem.
Mm-hmm. Very true. So what are some wise uses of the Earth's resources, and in contrast to that would be some unwise uses of the Earth's resources?
Well, my favorite thing to target is to reduce pollution. Make it so that the things that cause trouble, we have a safe way of dealing with them, either recycling them, disposing of them, whatever it takes. There are some plastics that in today's technology cannot be recycled. The best thing to do is to burn them in high temperature ovens that break the gases that are formed that are toxic, that in turn are heated to where they come out as nothing but CO2 and very simple stuff that is non-toxic. I want to make a point. CO2 is not a toxic gas. Too much of it is toxic. 100% oxygen can be toxic. And they're right. If you want to start a worldwide fire, just have the Earth's atmosphere be nothing but oxygen, and it wouldn't take more than a day for the whole place to burn up.
Right.
So we need to have common sense here. But and so there are ways of doing that. Something is just simply, as we were talking about with the soil, don't damage the soil to begin with. We're getting a lot of good ideas now. Modern agricultural science has just jumped leaps and bounds forward in ability to do it, but we don't always do it. Sri Lanka is a sad example, again, of politics overriding common sense. They had ample ability to feed their people good crop production, and then they declared they would have no more fertilizer except what they could get from animals. And they're now suffering starvation in that country. Use common sense.
Right.
They want to paint the fertilizers that are made synthetically as being bad when they are the same chemical that is in the natural stuff. It's just purified. And if you use it correctly, don't misuse it, be careful with it, that you can enhance things for all. That is for us, that is for ecosystems, that is for everybody if we use it responsibly. Again, it comes to good stewardship. Don't just grab for the money or to look good if you're a politician wanting to get elected to something, but do the right thing, as it's been said.
Yeah, I think the leader of Sri Lanka had to wind up resigning and fleeing for his life when the folks started protesting over food shortages. And kind of another view that I heard when all that was coming down was that folks were saying, if they would have, like you said, been taking some common sense and just eased off their use of those commercial fertilizers and chemical fertilizers, they would not have had near the issues of just going cold turkey, because the soil is a living organism. There's more microbes in the soil than I forget the numbers, but there's a lot of microbes in the soil. And so, when you have been giving them something and just cut it off, it's not going to end well. And so that would probably be an example of unwise use of Earth's resources. What would be some other ones?
Okay, unwise use is where people wanted to build their homes in the Mississippi floodplain. That's a bad idea. That river is known periodically to flood catastrophically. But if you pay attention, you also see the floodplain has edges to it, which are hills and higher ground. Build it there. If you want to grow crops in the floodplain, that's great. That's good soil. You want to raise your animals there as well, great. And when the flood comes, well, your crops get flooded. That's too bad. You get your animals to high ground, and you wait for it to be over with. It's probably adding more soil while it's doing it. And then you can go back, and your home isn't destroyed. You're doing fine, but people, it's like in my home state of Florida, they built along the coast right at about sea level. I watched as a teenager and young adult areas just south of St. Petersburg where they built artificial islands and extensions to the little island strips there and put big subdivisions there, And they built seawalls all around it. Yeah, very good, very strong, but they're only averaging about 2 to 3 feet above mean high tide. Then you have a Milton come along that could have sent things to 15 feet to 20. Oh. It turns out it didn't do it there. It did it south of Sarasota. They got hammered because of a slight change in its direction. As was thought one point, it was going to drive water straight into Tampa Bay, and that would have flooded all of downtown Tampa, where all the banking buildings and other big areas, it would have flooded Tampa International Airport, all of that, because they didn't build responsibly. They should have known from the beginning, because everybody knew about hurricanes when Florida started to develop, especially after World War II. And they just let people build wherever they wanted. And now we're paying the price for it in terms of tens of billions of dollars of damage.
So what about mining? Is there a way to do mining responsibly? I've heard some of your environmental extremists say that all mining is bad, like with fossil fuels and things like that, coal. Mm-hmm. But is there a way to do that responsibly without damaging the landscape?
Yes, there have been clear examples of where it was done very irresponsibly, with no concern for what would be left afterwards. We have the legacy of that in various parts of this country as well as the rest of the world. But we also have mines and all where they're doing a great job. They will go in, extract whatever it is. Let's say it's coal in Wyoming. So oftentimes that's not very deep. It's almost on the surface. In some places, you go in, you strip it out, you gather it up. They then, since they have all the heavy equipment, they go back in, spread the land back, and begin to reseed it with natural prairie plants and all to return it back to its prairie condition. And it will take a little while, but eventually it will heal. That's been done as well. Mining now used to cause all manner of pollution around the drill sites, but now it is so much better, so much more controlled. The technology is so much better, and instead of having literally like in Oklahoma in the 1920s where you have in a square mile, you may have 1,000 drilling rigs pumping oil. Now they may have 2, 3, and they do the horizontal drilling where they go down to the level where the stuff is, gas or oil. They can then turn the thing sideways. That's an engineering marvel in itself. And drill sideways, and one spot that covers no more than, say, the size of a football field can cover hundreds and hundreds of acres or thousands of acres of actually underground extraction. We have to be cognizant that when you remove something, that leaves a void. And so you can get settling, which causes small earthquakes. Some of them big enough to where they can mess with foundations of homes. And so one thing that's been seen is that once you're taking out the oil or the gas, you can be pumping back in, say, water. That'll build an aquifer. You can pump in and do things like that. So that, again, look at what you can do to do things responsibly. A lot of places where oil and gas is being extracted does not trigger earthquakes due to the strata, but there are some types of strata that is prone to that. Well, you just take methods to deal with it. So in other words, and I'm not an oil person, I don't know it all, but I've seen what they can do, and they can do things very well. The big smokestacks of electric generating plants that they show on TV with the dark clouds coming out of it, it looks like it's just belching soot. It is not. That is a photographer's trick. You'll notice that every time you see that, the photograph is being, or the video is being done with the sun behind the clouds. For someone on the other side with the sun looking back at that same cloud coming out of the smokestacks, the clouds you would see would be pure white. It's steam. Another thing is smoke, when it goes, it slowly weakens and dissipates. Steam simply disappears. If you see something looks like ugly smoke coming out of a smokestack, it drifts off and just disappears. It's steam. It's not pollution.
Interesting.
You might understand why they want to show you the dark side only.
Right. It makes you wonder if there's an agenda or something. So Psalms 24:1 tells us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all that is in it. So as Christians, we're stewards of the earth, and we should probably be the ones on the front lines who are looking at ways to manage well the planet and its resources. So historically, has that been the case, or have we as Christians been lacking in our responsibility towards the earth?
I think largely we've been lacking, and a lot of it on both sides, believers, unbelievers, is through ignorance. We didn't realize the impact of what we were doing. People shooting buffalo from trains thought they would always be around, but everything is finite. There's only a finite number of buffalo, even when there were millions of them. And you can run out if you shoot enough of them. And so it was just irresponsible, not paying attention. We as believers sometimes want to focus on the spiritual and forget we're also material. We're physical. And we're responsible for the physical world around us as well as ourselves, our families, our health, and everything else. We're also responsible because God gave us this responsibility for the health of the ecosystems, the land, the soil, and the air around us as well.
There are those who say that as we are experiencing natural disasters and things like that, that it's a result of it's a result of these environmental issues. From a Christian worldview, what would be our response to that from a biblical worldview, maybe I should say?
Well, believers should be the exemplars of how to live harmoniously. Like you as working in agriculture and animal husbandry and all that, trying to do it responsibly, trying to take care of the animals, keep them healthy, keep your land healthy, keep the soil healthy by crop rotation and other means that are – I'm not one of you guys. I just do a backyard garden. But so anyway, and this is a way that we can demonstrate and put into practice what we talk about, to just live right, to recycle things. Also, don't use things irresponsibly. It comes down to a lot of common sense, and don't exploit the world around us. No part of Scripture says that we have permission to do that. That word exploit should be erased from the believer's mindset.
That's a very good way of putting that, because really following the example of Christ, following God whenever he created the world, he created it, he set things up to not just run for a certain period of time and then stop, run out. He set it up where the earth replenishes itself. It's regenerative, and if we follow his model and how he created, and we follow the guidelines we see in the Bible, the hints here and there, and common sense, look at the world, look at nature, and do that sort of thing, that yes, the planet can, or we can take care of the soil, we can take care of these things. And again, that just brings us back to who God is, and that he sets things up to be cared for, to be loved. And that was our responsibility when he placed us in the garden. That was the first commandment, to tend it and to keep it. And we didn't do so well with that. Man couldn't stick to his job. He had to be looking for something better, the shortcut to the knowledge of good and evil, and fell for the serpent's temptation and sinned. And ever since then, it has been man seeking his own way apart from God. And yet God showed a way of redeeming man's soul and sending Christ to die for us, to make a way for our relationship to be restored to God, and will, of course, ultimately restore this entire planet to his original design. So that is the beauty that we see throughout Scripture. And the gospel, like you said, the spiritual is important. It's the most important. It's what God put us here. But the gospel does not just impact where we spend eternity. It should impact every aspect of our lives. And when Christians drive by, when the world sees Christians, and whether it's our business or our land or just whatever resource that we have to steward, they should be able to tell there's someone different running this than what I see other places. So that's the challenge that we as Christians should take home.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Groves, thank you so much again for joining us and giving us your expert opinion on these topics. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for listening again. The Creation Matters podcast is a outreach of the Creation Experience Museum here in Branson, Missouri, where we give free guided tours, kind of starting there at creation and working our way all the way to the gospel, showing you how real science and the Bible fit together. If you would like to come for one of your tours, we are open Wednesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our last tour of the day begins at 3:30. And if you'd like to make an appointment, so that way you don't have to stand in line or anything like that, you can call us at 417-651-0750, or you can visit our website at creationexperiencemuseum.com. Again, thank you for listening, and join us again next time as we continue to see that the Bible is true all the way through.